Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to review the 1970 war epic Waterloo, which is about the Battle of Waterloo. And the Battle of Waterloo is the probably one of the most decisive battles in history because it put a bookend on one era. So Napoleon was not coming back after that. Bonapartism was dead. Well, at least for one generation. It would come back later and be decisively beaten also. And the thing about the film that's really amazing is it's a Soviet and Italian production, which is weird that those two countries would collaborate, starring Christopher Plummer, who I believe is Canadian, and Rob Steger. And it's directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, who was, I wanted to get the name right, he was a very famous Soviet director, and he directed a series of movies called War and Peace, and I think altogether the movies are about like 10, 15 hours. So he was the kind of an obvious choice to make this film, and they filmed it in Ukraine, and there's no special effects in the movie. So but it's hard to describe what it looks like. It looks like if you were really in the battle, what you would really see. And you actually see a lot more than what you would have seen in the battle because there's bird eye views. And generally, I think like nowadays, we're in Hollywood or generally big budget movies, they're not very good at filming battle scenes, right? And I think the classic thing is in Endgame. I'm not sure if it's Endgame or the other Avengers film where they have the Battle of Wakanda and they all stand in a straight line. Like all the heroes are in a straight line, and Thanos' minions are in a straight line, and that's how people have battles, But like it doesn't make any sense because obviously you want to have formations and you want to have like strategy. So you don't really get like a sense of the grand strategy of the battle. You get like the basics, but you actually see what's happening. And I think that it's really weird combination of making you seeing the glory of war and how beautiful everything looks and how majestic cavalry charges are and the cannon fire, but also seeing the horrible consequences of it. Like Christopher Plummer as Wellington says, the one of the saddest things apart from losing a battle is winning a battle because he's looking and the last scene is all of the bodies being arranged to be buried. And Plummer does a really good job of playing this sort of ar- aristocratic guy with a sort of a coldness to him. People might interpret it as being like a stiff upper lip, and maybe that's true to a certain extent, but you can see he's not emotional like Napoleon, but Napoleon was Italian, but he's not emotional like Napoleon, but there's a point where he's like, if Blucher or Bucher, I think it's Blucher, if Blucher doesn't come, because basically Napoleon and Wellington has an allied army. Napoleon has the French army. They're fighting in Waterloo. And basically, if Napoleon has separated these allied armies, so Wellington's army and Blucher's army, and some members of Napoleon's army are chasing Blucher. So the battle was raging, 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 and Napoleon was winning and the French were winning until the point where Blucher came with his 30,000 men, and then he won the war, basically, at that point. So, anyway, Wellington says something like, if Blucher doesn't come by dark, they'll break every bone in my body. And you can just see he's not, he is afraid, but he's not petrified by the fear. And it's so he does this great job of playing Wellington, but Rob Steiger as Napoleon is also really brilliant because he's this passionate man, really egotistical man, and you see all of his flaws. Like, he was indirectly responsible for millions of deaths. He's like the Hitler of the 18th century without the genocide, but just the warmongering was insane. And so you see all of that, like, hubris and, like, do I have to do everything myself? But you also see, like, there's a reason he was so arrogant, because until he ran out of men, he generally in battles he would win battles after battles and battles, and he was like one of the most brilliant strategists. That's a hard word to say. Strategists of his era. So there's kind of like a pathos to him. And the thing that you have to say about both of those men is, like, Napoleon wasn't a coward, right? So he wouldn't hide. Like, I'm not sure how true this is, but he had, like, some stomach issues, and I know that during the day of the battle he was generally not feeling very well, and his doctors were like, no, you have to stay. He lies down for a little bit in the middle of the battle, but he goes back, and he is like kind of like a roller coaster of emotions. And at the end there's like not really a confrontation. Like, Ney, his sort of frenemy, is saying something like, you will be chained to a rock like Prometheus, and they will chain you to a rock like Prometheus, and you will be gnawed at by your own former greatness, which is a great line, right? And Ney and him have this interesting dynamic because earlier in the film, I forgot what Louis, but anyway, Napoleon abdicated and he was sent to Elba, and then the Bourbons were restored and they weren't doing a very good job. They weren't very popular. So Napoleon's like, hey, why don't I come back? So he lands with 1,000 men in the south of France, and he's marching towards Paris. And so Ney, who had been Marshal of France, was sent to arrest him. So he brings all these men, and these French soldiers meet, and Napoleon goes up to the front, and this really happened actually. Maybe not exactly as it is in the movie, but he goes up to the front of the two little armies meeting, and he says, here I am. I'm your emperor. If you want to shoot me, shoot me. So Ney gives the order to fire, and they don't fire. So he was swept with this, like, emotion, and so even though he had put France through this whole thing connected to being so expansionist and having all of these battles, people still loved him in France. And it's weird because he asks one guy in the middle of the battle, like, how do you think people will remember me? And the French soldier says, oh, you extended the glory of France, or something like that. And he says, oh, I'm gonna give my son extended glory. He says, he said sardonically. So he is aware of the contradictions of his character, but he feels like he has this like important destiny, like he's a great man doing great things. And when he's losing the battle, he's trying to like force people with the strength of his will to stand there. And yeah, when everything goes badly, he's like, I will stand here and die with you as your general. And I think that that is what makes him such a fascinating character, because he is a dictator, yes, but he was really loved by his people. Yeah. And he did a lot of great things. He did a lot of bad things too. He was a brilliant strategist on the one hand, but on the other hand, why would you invade Russia? Like, don't do that. Don't do that. That's one of the classic things to avoid in war. Yeah, so it's just a great visual movie. They don't really make movies like that, and you think about like none of those are computer generated images. They're all people. These are like thousands of people, and I think to this day, it's the movie with the largest battle scenes. Yeah, it's really effective. So the acting is good, and I like the way it's directed because it shows you how awesome war can look and why it's attractive to people, but it also shows you, as I said, um, the real problems with it. You know, the real consequences of those cool looking actions that you do. And I also liked in war. I mean, I also liked the the choice to have the, Wellington and Napoleon act as Wellington and Napoleon when they're interacting with other people. You know, Napoleon is really arrogant, but then you can see his train of thought. Like they have these kind of monologues sometimes where they're talking about, it's one sentence or another sentence, but you can see sometimes like the brilliance of Napoleon and actually the brilliance of Wellington too, and how they're like playing with each other, you know. So it's good, and it is like this fascinating character of this man, this little short man. Like they make him short, although he wasn't actually that short in real life. He was an average height man. Yeah, so they make him a short, sick, dying man trying to like save everything. And yeah, so the last thought that I had about this movie and generally about Napoleon and Waterloo is, so Napoleon so after Napoleon abdicated and went to Elba, so the Bourbons were restored, and the Bourbons were the monarchy in France for thousands, maybe not thousands, hundreds of years. The Bourbons were the French monarchy. And the last French king who was beheaded in the Revolution, Louis XVI, who Napoleon would eventually replace as leader of the country, he was also a Bourbon. And I think the guy who inherited, maybe not inherited, he was chosen by the victorious powers, because basically what all of the other countries in Europe wanted to do is to put revolutionary France back in the bottle, because it had done a bunch of things that they didn't like promote liberty and equality and fraternity, and a lot of death and war also. So they wanted to put it back in the bottle, but the Bourbons were really incompetent generally, especially that king, although I forget what his name is. That was another Louis, probably Louis the 17th or 18th, 19th, whatever. So I could understand why the French would want somebody like Napoleon back, because Napoleon, for all the lows he dragged France to, also dragged it to the most successful position it had been. And if Napoleon had been able to make the make the state that he was creating more long lasting, it would have been very, very effective. And before I get to the point, I always wondered about that, and I don't know enough about that period of history. I've always wondered, like, was it just that Napoleon was just bent on conquering everything? And I think the answer is actually no. He wasn't really bent on conquering Europe, although that's pretty much what he did. Is he had alliances. So basically, when he started the war, so when he became the leader of France, all these wars were connected to the wars that revolutionary France had started. So he was just finishing them, and he finished them successfully, and then he would have alliances with Austria, for example, and then get in more wars, and then they just kind of like keep on going and going and going until he made a bad decision to go into Spain, and that caused like a guerrilla war, which, Wellington was involved in there. And he made the bad decision to punish Russia because they weren't a part of this continental blockade, because he was trying to starve the English out of the continent, and the English were sending products to Russia, and then those products from Russia would come into Europe. So he was trying to stop that by invading Russia, which seems like maybe you should rethink your strategy at that point. Like, okay, this continental blockade is not working, so we need to do something else. But as I said, I always wondered how much it was his personality that pushed those conflicts, and how much it was him reacting to other people reacting to his decisions. And I think it was a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B, because generally the nations around him didn't want this revolution to spread. Even Great Britain, which was theoretically a democracy, but not that democratic at the time. It would get more democratic after Napoleon in 1848, actually. But that's a different topic for a different day. So yeah, the thing that I always wondered, and I'm gonna tell you now, the thing that I always wondered about Napoleon is, he almost won the Battle of Waterloo. If Blücher, I don't remember what his name is. So if the Prussian general had been late or never made it, then Napoleon would have defeated Wellington. But then you have to say, it's the French army against all of Europe. So are they just going to stop at that time? Or are they going to raise a new army and say, like they defeat the Prussians and they defeat the British. So, okay, there's still the Austrians, there's still the Russians. So, I don't know. What I mean is, I don't think that it would have ended well for Napoleon anyway, because the political situation was just so toxic to the French at the time that they had to, everyone was ganging up on them and they would just stop. So as unfortunate as Waterloo was for Napoleon, it probably was the only ending, because at least he almost won. There might be another ending where he was completely, he ran out of weapons, ran out of men, whatever. So it's really fascinating movie, and really fascinating to think about how people have so much loyalty to this man who did some things which, as I mentioned, some good things, some bad things. And I think that sometimes in history we tend to make people into things that they are not, right? So Napoleon is one of these things, one of these people who is this icon for the French. And he becomes like people put their dreams and their hopes and their aspirations on. And it's interesting because I think the French can still feel that way to a certain extent about Napoleon. And nobody mentions Napoleon in the same breath as like Hitler or Stalin or Mao, even though those were figures who also had such a huge effect on the history of their country, and or Lenin, history of their country or history of the world. And it seems like maybe because it's such a long time ago that Napoleon is safe now because there's so much distance. So I wonder if in 200 years people are going to be like, yeah, Stalin murdered a bunch of his own people, but yes, he protected Russia against the Nazi invasion, or even worse, like, oh yeah, Hitler killed a bunch of people, but look how much of the continent he conquered. I hope that's not where we're going in that direction. Then and maybe the difference is like he is a yeah, maybe the difference is his military success was clearly connected to a lot of factors, but also clearly connected to his personal abilities. You know, Stalin, maybe not Stalin, but Hitler had pretensions to being a great general, but he wasn't. You know, he got lucky in the beginning of the Second World War, but Napoleon at least was a really great general, and he at least was willing to be with his men and have the same, well, a little bit of the same kind of situation as his men. So, yeah, it's really interesting to think. You know, and I don't think that people are really like idolizing Napoleon right now. I don't think that there is anybody who's like, yay, Napoleon. But when you say Napoleon, you know, you have this image, right? And it's all of that stuff. It's him on the horse. It's Waterloo. It's invading Russia in the winter. It's being the first consul and putting the thing on his head. It's all of that, right? So he's really, really fascinating. Maybe he's like Julius Caesar, right? Because Caesar also was a dictator. And maybe that's why he is so attractive to our imagination. And will he be remembered as Caesar was remembered, is remembered? I don't know. Interesting to think about, though. All right, that is my very rambling review of Waterloo, the movie from 1970, starring Christopher Plummer and Rod Steiger. So check it out. It's really, really good. And when you check it out, come back to this video and let me know what you think in the comment section, because that's what comment sections are for. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye.